Would members of the Budget Committee please report to Community Room 1 for quorum, please?
Good morning. I'd like to bring this meeting to order. We do have quorum. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. My name is Gary Crawford. I'm the chair of the Budget Committee. Today we have a subcommittee of the Budget Committee who will be listening to deputations from residents of the city. We have been, over the last 2 days, the Budget Committee has broken up into 2 separate subcommittees, and we have been going to different parts of the city from Etobicoke, North York, East York, York, and Scarborough. Today we will be in, the subcommittee will be here at City Hall to listen to deputations from members of the public. We are going to be making decisions on the 2018 capital and operating budgets, and we are in the part of the process where we are listening to the citizens and residents of Toronto on their opinions, comments on the 2018 budget. It's an incredibly important, from my perspective and my colleague on the committee, an incredibly important part of the process where we get to hear your input on the staff budget that has been presented to us. And as part of the process, we will be listening to the deputations, as I've said, over the last couple of days and today. This will be going off to full budget starting Friday and on the 23rd of January, and the Budget Committee will be making recommendations on the 2018 budget that will be going to executive, and then it'll be going from there to full council in the middle of February. So this is where we are in the process right now. It's the part where we get to listen to the members of, or the residents of the city. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and home to many diverse and Indigenous peoples. I'd like also to remind you that the deputations and this session is being taped. You can watch us on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live, or you can go onto your computer tablet at toronto.ca/council. I want to welcome my colleague, Councillor Burnside, who is part of the subcommittee, along with Councillor Cressy, who has joined us. Are there any conflicts of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. We're going to start with the deputation. Now, I just want to go over what, with regard to the deputations there. It looks like there are approximately 69 people who have registered to depute. We will be going from 9:30 to 12:30, taking a break and coming back at 1:30. I'm also noticed, and you have 5 minutes to depute, so there'll be 5 minutes. There are clocks on right over here and behind you. I'll give you a little nudge around 5 minutes if you haven't wrapped up, just to suggest that we could wrap up by 5 minutes. With the amount of people that we have today, I'm going to be sort of enforcing or pushing the 5-minute deadline. So if you, when you're looking at or looking over what you want to say to us today, try to make sure that you can say what you can and what you want to say within the 5 minutes. There are also a number of groups that I'm seeing that are on the list. So I don't know, you have every right to speak for the 5 minutes per group if you wish. We have had in the past, sometimes groups will actually block their time. All 3 or 4 people will come up and bring their time together. It makes it a little easier for us to digest the information that you're providing us. So that'll be an opportunity with some of the groups that are here. If you want to come up individually, that's fine, but as a group, you could also come up to speak to us. On that, I'll begin with the first speaker, and that will be John Scarf, or Scarfe. Scarf. Welcome. You will have 5 minutes, and you can begin. Can you hear me? Is there a little button in front of you? Just press it. And,
how about now?
We can hear you.
All right.
As can everybody else.
Good morning. My name is John Scarf, and I live in Ward 22. I speak to you today as a member of the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto. You'll hear from 3 other people today on differing issues. I'm here to talk to you about the poverty reduction strategy. First, Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto has a large congregation. We are over 2,000 people from across the GTA, most of whom are residents of this city. We are a diverse community from all walks of life, ethnicities, and socioeconomic backgrounds. The advocacy work done over the past 40 years by our church under the leadership of Reverend Dr. Brent Hawks is well known to many of you. We led the fight for marriage equality and performed the first same-sex weddings in the modern world. Our pastor presided at the funeral of the late Jack Layton. And in 2014, when Toronto hosted World Pride, we led the parade with Reverend Hawks acting as its Grand Marshal. Although many label us the gay church, we think of ourselves as Toronto's leading human rights church. What we are hearing from our community is that amidst this period of rapidly rising real estate values and unprecedented economic growth, hardworking people across this city continue to struggle financially. Homeowners have experienced an extraordinary windfall in their investment. Tourism is booming, yet 1 in 4 children live in poverty, and our homeless shelters are overflowing. There is a growing cynicism as we watch our neighborhoods change, see mom-and-pop businesses pushed out by high rents, giving way to foreign-owned chains. The average working person has had to come to grips with the fact that home ownership has become nothing more than a pipe dream. In 2015, when this city passed the poverty reduction strategy, it made a serious commitment. To use the words of Mayor Tory, found on page 1 of the strategy itself, and I quote, "A snapshot has emerged in recent years of a city unfairly and unjustly divided by income, class, and geography. In Toronto, there are 150,000 kids growing up in poverty and 15 neighborhoods with poverty rates 40% or higher. This cannot be allowed to continue. As a city, we must work to address these disparities." A lot of time, money, and analysis went into formulating this plan. If properly funded over the next 17 years, it will go a long way to obliterating poverty and making Toronto a fairer and more livable city by creating stable housing, providing affordable childcare, increasing access to city services for low-income Torontonians, making transit affordable, increasing access to nutritious food, and ensuring equality of opportunity through good jobs and livable incomes. This plan was passed because it was seen as realistic and achievable. However, according to the preliminary draft budget, the poverty reduction strategy remains woefully underfunded. A total of $13.7 million is needed from the city this year just to keep it going. We understand that raising taxes is often seen as political suicide. With respect, you, our city councillors, need to rethink your approach because, frankly, this is where the rubber meets the road. Instead of saying, hey, it's an election year, we can't afford to raise taxes, you need to rethink that statement. Hey, it's an election year, we can't afford to break our promises. We can't afford to dishonor the commitments we made, and we can't afford to let the people of this city down. We're counting on you to follow through. If you can't find the necessary funds to support the poverty reduction strategy within the existing budget, then that budget needs to change. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Questions? Councillor Burnside.
Thank you. This is a question. Actually, it was just your last statement. You said if you can't find the existing funds, then we need to figure that out, raise taxes, whatever the case is. If we find the existing funds, do you still think we need to raise taxes?
If you could find the city, the existing funds within the existing budget without robbing Peter to
pay Paul,
then yeah, it's a commitment. It's a 20-year commitment. We need $13.7 million this year. You can find it, and you don't need to raise taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
You're talking about ongoing sustainability, though, are you not? You're asking us. I think we heard this in a couple of other deputations last night and the night before too. By raising taxes, we would actually be building this $13 million into a base in a sustainable way, so that what we serve, we can continue to serve. That's what you're looking for in the poverty reduction strategy.
Yes.
Okay. Just a comment. I have raised taxes above inflation, and here I am 15 years later. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your deputation. Next will be Louis Gonzalez. I believe that's the pronunciation of the last name.
Thank you. It's Gonsalves.
Oh, Gonzalez. Okay, thank you.
So, as you know, my name is Louis Gonsalves, and I live in Ward 3. And good morning to everyone. I consider Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto my church home. I've been a member for 21 years. Around 700 members attend every Sunday, or 1/3 of our total membership. We represent a diversity of ethnic, gender, and sexual identities and socioeconomic backgrounds. What we have in common is a clear understanding that at MCC Toronto, we are genuinely welcomed and celebrated for being simply who we are. I'd like to think that, as with MCC Toronto, the leadership of this amazing city holds this understanding about its citizens as well. The preliminary budget falls seriously short of moving Toronto forward in being a city inclusive of all. Fellow MCCT colleagues will speak to the barriers in housing, refugee issues, and as John spoke, of the overall poverty reduction strategy. I am here this morning to speak to you about the need to increase the subsidized recreation spaces for marginalized youth and low-income residents. LGBTQ+ youth, refugees, and recent arrivals are among the most at risk. So why is this a pressing issue? Waiting lists for recreation programs have increased by 74% in the last 3 years to almost 200,000. Children and youth make up the largest group, with swimming, camps, and sports programs topping the list. Recreation fees are set to increase again this year by 2.12%. Interestingly, the Welcome Policy, which I think is a great title, providing subsidy to low-income residents to take part in recreation programs, is being cut. Now, one might have anticipated an increase to the Welcome Policy. Instead, it's being eliminated. The preliminary budget does not earmark new funding to address the long wait lists, even though City Council passed a motion to expand recreation spaces by at least 10 to 20,000 for 2018. So it is my ask then that the final budget include the additional recreation spaces and sustain, if not increase, the funds to the Welcome Policy. It is known that the determinants of health includes access to recreation programs which help mitigate mental health concerns. Cost analyses point to decreased strain on traditional health services in communities where there is increased access to recreational programs and services. Not only is it cost effective, it is foremost a preventative and compassionate way in which we promote wellness for those less able. So where do we get funding? If it's impossible to find the funds necessary to support this initiative within the existing budget, I'm sure you've heard this before, then it needs to change. Perhaps it's time to advocate for increased taxes, such as property, parking, hotel, and tolls, in order to increase revenues, regardless of this being an election year. So respectfully, the budget simply needs to increase if we are to do anything substantial that addresses issues of poverty and inequity. It's about funding initiatives of accessibility. Maybe then we come closer to being inclusive of all, fully celebrating the rich diversity within this vibrant Toronto. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to these important issues.
Thank you. Other questions? No? Great.
Thank you.
Next is Jim Marshall.
Good morning. Hello, my name is Jim Marshall. I reside in Ward 6. I'm also a member of the Peace and Justice Strategy Team of Metropolitan Community Church. Our congregation at MCC, as you already have heard, is over 2,000 people. The church is located in Ward 30, and people in our congregation come from many wards across the city and beyond. Today, I'm here to talk about the need for action by the city to significantly increase the number of shelter beds and contribute to the creation of affordable housing beyond your current pace. According to the City of Toronto budget documents, the waiting list for affordable housing is expected to rise to over 100,000 households this year. The city has yet to meet any of its own targets for creating affordable housing. The challenge has been with us for nearly 25 years, when in 1993, the federal government dismantled our national housing program. As a result, more than 100,000 affordable housing units were never built. The federal government has now introduced a Canada-wide national housing strategy that puts the city behind. It's time for the city to step up and do what it can and work with the federal and provincial governments to be full partners with the city in responding to this crisis. The homelessness crisis is so great that the City of Toronto projects no improvement in shelter occupancy levels despite current plans for new beds. And here we go again. Given the pressures on the city and your budget, City Council should increase property taxes beyond the rate of inflation and push for other revenue or tax sources such as parking tax, tolls, hospital tax, etc., hotel tax, etc., to increase city revenues. Without new and increased revenue sources to address this crisis, the waiting list for affordable housing will continue to climb, and more citizens of Toronto will either continue to find themselves in precarious housing situation or they will die. Why are we interested in this issue of housing and homelessness? A number of the members of Metropolitan Community Church live in vulnerable situations related to their housing circumstances. Many are underemployed and are part of situations of housing risk. We support a number of refugee individuals and families who have recently arrived in Canada. In addition, we advocate for just housing solutions for those in vulnerable circumstances, such as trans individuals and LGBTQ youth. In conclusion, let me restate the call for action with which I began. You need to facilitate the delivery of new affordable housing. You also need to do much more to respond to the homelessness crisis that the recent extreme cold alert made so abundantly clear. And you need to find new sources of funding to begin to make a dent in this serious crisis. Please act quickly so that your decisions have a positive impact for the 2018 city budget. We need sufficient and stable funding. Many of the actions you can take are quick and at low cost, but you also need to set in place policies and infrastructure for systemic change to tackle homelessness and increase affordable housing. Remember that fair housing is not a handout. It is an investment in our citizens and in a livable city that values fairness and equality of opportunity. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your deputation. Seeing no questions, Councillor Carroll has a question.
Thank you for raising the idea of not just finding a way to get through this year, but to do it sustainably. I don't know if you're aware, we always talk, and I can remember I did a budget town hall in MCC once, and someone said, what about assessment growth? And what we always say is that, well, yes, you know, lots and lots of condos are built and new residents come here, but we have to serve them as well. So it's not a windfall. In fact, this year we're just going to use assessment growth to just plug the hole in the budget, keep the taxes low, and reduce services. If we use the assessment growth to actually expand the budget, that would be $55 million this year. If we just added to that, say, personal vehicle tax, that would be another 75. There's $130 million to spend on housing. Should we be looking at extraordinary measures like that this year?
That's your decision, but I would say yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, so we'll go to the next speaker, Alex Dugman-Manzir. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Alex Dugman-Mansour and I live in Ward 28. I'm also the manager of refugee programs and SA representative, which is the sponsorship agreement holder for the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, located in Ward 30. Our membership exceeds 2,000 people, and in 2017, we provided services and programming to over 700 LGBTQ refugees. I would like to thank the Budget Committee for the opportunity of speaking today. I am here this morning hoping to voice the concerns of LGBT refugees, community members, service providers, and other organizations with regards to access to affordable, safe, secure, and adequate housing for all LGBT refugees without distinctions, and to request that the City of Toronto secures funding to make this a reality. If we want our refugees to settle well, we need to be able to provide and make sure that their basic needs are covered. According to the report from 2015 called Envisioning LGBT Refugee Rights in Canada, Is Canada a Safe Haven?, LGBTQ refugees identified access to housing as one of their worries and priorities and felt that being identified as a member of the LGBT community, a refugee, or a person receiving social or government assistance had a negative impact on their ability to access basic services, including housing. The experiences of many refugees are represented by the following testimony. I have done a number of interviews with landlords where I was asked, are you going to school or are you working? That's the #1 question that I cannot answer. So I am like, oh, I just got here, but then they would say, so do you have an ID? And then you only have the refugee ID. And you know that if you show them your refugee ID, automatically it's a no. Many LGBTQ refugees don't have the support of their families or communities and often rely on shelters where they can often, unfortunately, also experience homophobia and or transphobia. Refugee claimants that identify as transgender face greater personal security challenges when searching for housing or accommodation. With regards to social housing, the long wait list makes it almost impossible for newcomers to access these units. Currently, it can take over 10 years for a household to get a unit, and so the majority of newcomers can only access housing in the for-profit private sector at prices they cannot afford or outside of areas where they feel safe or connected to community. In the poverty reduction strategy, the City of Toronto asks a very relevant question. Do we want to fund the high cost of homelessness with more expenses in emergency shelters, healthcare, incarceration, and other social determinants of health, or the lower cost of stable housing? If we want to fund the lower cost of stable housing, some of the recommendations that I would like to make this committee are to make access to affordable housing, including shelter services, a priority for LGBTQ refugees, given their extensive vulnerabilities. To provide funding so that shelters have the resources to be responsive to the unique and specific housing needs of LGBTQ refugees. This means making appropriate and safe accommodation arrangements available, including gender-neutral washrooms. To assist LGBTQ refugees to secure and maintain affordable housing, offering housing allowances, and advocating in front of the federal and the Ontario government for more flexible routes to provide housing subsidy options. To increase the supply of affordable housing, including, for instance, providing government land for new public housing developments or turning city-owned buildings into public housing. And to increase property taxes beyond the rate of inflation and push for other revenues and tax resources to fund these initiatives. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. The shelter work that you do, and with respect to the refugees that are that you're serving, have you seen an uptake and a greater demand put on our shelter system and our affordable housing system in the last, say, 12 months, 2 years?
Oh, absolutely. The wait list right now. So the shelter work that I do is usually just referring some of our people to the shelter system by calling the central intake at the City of Toronto. It used to be that at the beginning of the year, I would pick up the phone, call the central line, and they would match the refugee with a shelter. Right now, they try to find a shelter and they have no available beds, and that means that either you continue constantly calling because you cannot be put on a queue when you do it over the phone, or you go out to 129 Peter Street and you just stay there all day until they give you the next available bed.
The individuals, the clients that you serve, are they mostly singles, men, women, families?
The majority of people that we serve are LGBTQ identified, and they are mostly gay men or lesbian women and some transgender, but we also have families with small children that come here in lesser percentages. Some of them are single, some of them are in partnerships, some of them have found partnerships here, so they're all kinds of mix. But I would say that the main concern and barrier, especially for transgender people who don't feel safe necessarily in a shelter system, because if depending on where they're sent and if they have a private accommodation or not in that center.
Last night, the shelter occupancy rate was 95%, which is 5% above the target that the city sets. Would you say is it safe to say that you'd be supportive of us doing and funding whatever we could to bring that rate down to what our target is of 90%?
I would say that I would be into systemic change and long-term changes. And of course, you also have to tackle the emergency that you have today. So having short-term goals, middle-term goals, and long-term goals, I would support anything that within certain ethics, would allow people to be housed. But however, I don't believe that emergency shelter housing, it is a long-term solution for the housing crisis that Toronto is facing today.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, just a quick question, because you touched on something at the very end about could we use city buildings. I just want to make sure there's no confusion, because one of the deputies from MCC has already talked about making sure that that the welcome policy stays alive and that we continue to create subsidized rec spaces for youth. We get, when we're having a shelter crisis, always people saying, oh, this is just political. You could shut down a community center or a library and use it for a shelter right now. You're not advocating for that.
Absolutely.
You're talking about surplus buildings and window repair warehouses and things like that we could begin to rationalize.
I'm certainly not advocating for shutting down community centers or libraries at all. That would not be. However, I do believe that housing is a #1 priority, but I am advocating to put more funding into housing.
Right,
Yes.
right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure there was no confusion, because I got hammered on AM radio. If you really cared, you'd just shut down a community center right now, but we serve the communities that need to be served there as well.
Yeah. Community centers and libraries especially are places where refugees find support, comfort, and I would not be in favor of shutting them down.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
invitation. Next is Michael Rosenberg. Welcome, Michael.
Yes, I'm Michael Rosenberg. I want to address the sustainability issue, and in particular, what is the situation we're in? It's not a growing economy, it's a shrinking economy. And actually, we have to address the priorities issue. Now, the problem is that the picture we have of what's going on is not really correct. It isn't the case that taxes haven't gone up faster than inflation. If you look at the actual charts, they show the total tax increase is 2.89%. What's actually happened is that money has gone into the capital budget. The increase in capital from current alone is 20% of that line item, but more importantly, 1% of the entire tax revenue. So the picture we're being given of the budget can't fund what we want because tax revenue should be increased is simply incorrect. The reason we can't fund what we want is a combination of 3 factors. One is the economy is not doing well, and that doesn't allow for tax revenue increase or any other easy solution of that kind. The other reason is that we're set in a direction in society of increasing technology and other social changes and technological changes that are making these factors worse and impoverishing people. We don't actually have an inequality problem. We have a shrinking of the entire society problem. Things are simply getting worse. People are losing their ability to be well off, and it's affecting everybody, not just a certain section of the population. Everybody is having trouble affording housing and other things. So what we have right now is a priorities problem, but it's not a priorities problem within that $41 million. everything in that list of $41 million is a high priority, or maybe with one or two exceptions, because the new and enhanced always gets a lot of scrutiny, and nothing would be on that list if it isn't a high priority. The problem is a priorities problem in terms of the overall direction of the city. How much money goes into technology? How much money goes into roads? How much money goes into things like housing and transit? We need to look at the overall direction. Do we want to continue technology in such a way that it uses up resources and shrinks the economy, reduces the tax base, and makes things less efficient and unproductive, and therefore we get less social services? That's an overall priority problem. You need to look at the priorities between the capital budget and the operating budget. If you were to save money in the capital budget, you could reduce capital from current and have more money in the operating budget. You could easily save $100 million in the capital budget from some areas in technology and roads where you don't need to have as much as you do now, and where in some cases it's actually counterproductive and reducing the welfare of the city. And then you would have $50 million more for currently unfunded capital projects. You would reduce the capital from current by $50 million, and you would have $50 million more in the operating budget. So that's the real picture, is we have a sustainability problem in the overall direction and priorities of the city. We have plenty of tax revenue, especially given the small economy. That's all we're going to get from tax revenue. We have now a priorities problem where if we adjust not between the little items and pick which of the $41 million gets funded, they can all get funded. It's other areas like technology where we need to reduce the budget and make it possible to fund all of those areas. So yes, go ahead and look at priorities, but look at the priorities between the major big budget line items, not within the small items. Make priorities in such a way that you can fund all of the $41 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Questions? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Burnside.
Thank you. Hi, Michael.
Yes.
Thank you for your deputation. You did pick up on the fact that the taxes actually are going up higher than inflation. That was for, could you give us the year that the 2.89%?
I've seen it for at least the last 2 years.
Yeah, have you done a calculation? So you haven't done a calculation how much faster they've gone up in the last 5 years?
I didn't do like the full 5 years, but last year it was even more. It was 3.49, I think, somewhere around 3.5. Yeah. And this year it's 2.89. So it's significantly beyond inflation. And the main reason for that is that the capital budget used to be funded more from debt. Now we're actually funding it more from taxes. So that eats up that amount, and therefore the amount that actually stays in the operating budget increases by far less than inflation. It was around 0.5% last year or something. I don't know exactly, but it was vastly smaller than inflation, and that makes it look like there's a revenue problem, but there actually isn't a revenue problem. There's a problem in the fact that too much of that revenue goes into capital. And as I was saying, the new and enhanced services get a lot of scrutiny or they wouldn't be on that list, but there's a lot of items in the capital budget that just get passed without the same degree of scrutiny. So if you were prioritizing, you wouldn't take something out of the new and enhanced list. You take out some capital projects that are sort of not that useful or reduce their scope. Sometimes people object because you don't want to eliminate something entirely. Then don't eliminate it. Just reduce the size and scope of some of the capital projects to save money.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have you looked, and I appreciate that. Have you looked at the increased strain on our shelter system in the last year? At all?
I mean, yes, and it's extremely visible on the streets. I've never passed so many people asking for money in a given day as I have this year.
Were you here for the budget, one of the budget meetings where where staff mentioned that when we had about 4,400 beds last year, 10% were being used by refugees, and now we have about 5,500, and that number's up to 25%. 25% of our shelter spaces are used by refugees. Were you here for that?
I didn't hear that exact number, but I mean, I guess maybe the federal government needs to sort of fund refugees for 2 years rather than 1 year or something, because it obviously doesn't quite get them into good, stable situations fast enough. But I mean, that's sort of a very
I think that, yeah, and
specific
you sort of took the words out of my mouth. The calculation that we did, or I did anyway, is that the increased strain on the city is about $38 million annually. And, but so you agree that the federal government needs to step in?
I mean, as I say, that's a minor issue. I wouldn't object to the city paying for it. I mean, my point is that there's tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that can be shifted around within other budget items. And if it happens to be the case that we have to pay more for refugees, that's fine with me. All of those types of things, whether it be transit or housing or refugees, are good uses of money. Things like the Gardner Expressway and replacing city computers on a routine basis. I was once in somebody's office typing on a document on their computer in the city here, and you know, he said, well, we better be careful to save that file because they're replacing my computer tomorrow, and there was nothing wrong with it, right? This kind of thing, like just extend the time between replacements of computers and just save money. Eliminate some unnecessary software projects. I mean, if you put the software projects for like new tweaks on software and some additional features they want through the same degree of scrutiny you put funding refugees through, you would save hundreds of millions of dollars, well, not hundreds, but tens of millions of dollars in that area alone. I mean, people worry about capital projects over a 30-year lifespan. The city will spend $7 billion on technology over 30 years, and people don't think about that, right?
Great. Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Carroll.
It's interesting that you raise the issue of capital because, as you know, we haven't really done a review of how do we deliver capital for a long time. A decision was made at amalgamation. We're going to keep employees for operating. We're going to contract out all capital, and that's about it. That's the depth of our look at capital. We haven't gone in since and looked at what is our philosophy on technology. You know, increasing capability of how 311 happens is fine, but the millions of computers all over the operation that really just are used for email, just email. Nobody's sitting around doing graphic design or anything like that. And we haven't gone back and re-examined that for a long time. We haven't looked at our debt per capita. I ask it every year. We're very disciplined about how much actual debt we have at a moment, and yet when they talk to counselors, and we ask what's our debt, they tell you what our debt will be for the next 10 or 20 years. They don't honestly tell us what have we got loaned out right now and how little is it costing us, what's it costing us per capita. Are you suggesting that to really find some of the money, we do an overhaul of how we deliver capital right down to how we build a set of stairs in Etobicoke, that newspaper story, where to get the newspaper story to end, we simply let inside union workers go and build a quick staircase and cut the cost by 40, no, I think it was 60%. Should we just do an examination of our policy on capital and see what it nets?
So capital definitely needs more focus, but I'm not talking about that kind of, you know, looking at how they spend the money type thing. I'm talking about making decisions about what kind of city we want and what is worth spending money on. So, I mean, even assuming all the money is being spent well, it doesn't mean that the kinds of things we focus on and our vision of the future is correct. So I'm asking for an even deeper analysis of why we spend so much money on computers.
Right.
And what the effect of that is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael, for your deputation. Next is Kayla Hamilton. Kayla Hamilton. Okay. Next is Sophia Parveen.
Hello, my name is Safia Parveen. I am from Ward 26, resident of Thorncliffe Park. I am facilitator of Thorncliffe Wellness Cafe and a community animator of Thorncliffe Park and representing residents of the Thorncliffe community today. I would like to thank the Budget Committee for giving me the opportunity to speak. I am here to speak about the importance of affordable housing in the city. Over the past few months, I have been speaking with residents at the Thorncliffe Park, and their vision is for here to have more affordable housing units built. The rent of apartments are extremely high, and families, especially who are lower income or new immigrants to the city, cannot afford rent. Because of financial challenges, new immigrants have to rent one-bedroom apartments at the beginning when they first arrive to Toronto. Even with 2 or more children, they can only afford rental apartments that are one bedroom and the space is really small. Even though I have been living in Canada for more than 10 years, I still cannot afford to move out of the one bedroom. I currently live with 4 adults. This includes my husband, 19 years old daughter, and 16 years old son. I applied for subsidized housing in July 2007, and I am still waiting for this. Yesterday I called them and they said that the wait list is 13 years. The current wait list for subsidized housing is so long that I cannot wait for that. Even if I move to a 2-bedroom apartment now, with a new lease, I have to pay for additional hydro, locker, and parking cost. I should not have to choose between having to pay for my monthly rent, nutritious food to feed my family, pay for medical cost and transit costs to get to work, medical appointments, and seeing my friends. More affordable rental apartments need to be created immediately. Without the money to build more affordable housing, it is also severely impacting my health, my emotional health, physical health, and most importantly, my mental health. Not having affordable housing directly impacts my family relationship also. Recently, I got into an argument with my daughter over our living situation. I also don't know if I am able to pay next month's rent with prices increasing for everything. We worry month after month, not knowing if we can afford to pay for home. Our family may be living on the street if affordable housing is not available for families like myself and my other friends and neighbors in the Thorncliffe Park. I hope that the Budget Committee should invest in more affordable housing in the 2018 city budget so that others like myself and my neighbors can have decent affordable housing. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your deputation. Next is Shakila Tariq. Oh, sorry, Councillor Davis had a question for you.
Thank you very much for coming, and I hear affordable housing is clearly a #1 priority. What is the program you work with, or the organization you're involved with?
C2C. C2C.
Okay. And in Thorncliffe, I know that there are other services that are lacking as well. Are there other things about Thorncliffe that you think we ought to be addressing? Not just Thorncliffe, but in other neighborhoods that have high levels of newcomers, low income. Are there other services in your neighborhood and probably in others that you think we should be looking at in this budget?
Yes, the priority is that affordable housing first.
Right.
And we have a lot of more problems, but right now, today I am talking about it.
Okay.
Yeah, because I am suffering from this. You know, in one bedroom, and my daughter, she goes to the university last year when she was ready to go for first year, and she was crying. And me too, because I can't do anything for her. And I can't go upstairs, up floors in my building because of the elevator problem. So I was looking that I should have one apartment, 2-bedroom at least, at the first floor. I am diabetic also. And this is affecting my mental health because we have moved to the living room. My husband, my son, and me, because she said that I want only 1 bedroom for my study.
Yes.
You know, we give 1 bedroom to her. And we are in the living room, and in the living room, sometimes my son, he wants to play.
Right.
So my husband wants to sleep. I want to sleep tomorrow to go for my job, and we can't sleep.
Yes.
So these are affecting our mental health also.
Yes. I think there's something like 20,000 waiting for 3-bedroom units at TCHC. Anyway, thank you very much for your
Thank you for listening me.
personal experience with a situation of underhousing. Thank you.
Yes, and this is very critical for us because at that day she was crying, me too, and she said that I want to decorate the living room. I said this living room is my bedroom, my living room, my everything. So don't move my sewing machine from this to that place because I want to do this. So please listen to these problems.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me our time. Thank you.
Next is Suraya Nikhat. So do we have, is it 2 of you that are?
I'm just here for her support.
Okay.
Yeah. She's my daughter. Yeah. Good morning. My name is Shakila Tariq. I am from Ward 26. Today, I am here to get your attention. I belong to a community organization, Wellness Cafe, run by Safia Parveen. Through this organization, I got the opportunity and the confidence to speak up myself and my community. I would like to thank the Budget Committee for giving me the opportunity to voice my opinion today. I am here to get your attention towards my and my community's concern on a hot topic of residential rental problems. The rents are going up constantly. We know the government is working on that, but we want you to pay more attention on this matter. Affordable housing is a basic need for everybody. I think this matter needs urgent attention. Nowadays, house rents are too much as compared to minimum wage. I am sorry to say that the cost of housing means choosing between paying the rent and putting food on the table. Families with low income are unable to provide their children extra study and entertainment, activities that provide important development. It is impossible for low-income families to think about owning a house because the present mortgage rules and down payment is not affordable. Today, I would like to share my personal problem about my family. I have 4 children, all are in school. It is very difficult for my husband to run the house because 90% of our income goes to house rent. I landed in Canada in 2013, but still we cannot think about buying our own house. I would like the committee to fund more affordable housing and build more. I request to my city government, please increase the budget for affordable housing in the upcoming city budget. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak. Again, I am very thankful of my cabinet and my supportive audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Next is Suraya Nikat. Suraya Nikat. Nuzhat Jaz. Nuzhat Jaz. Sahil Shuri. Sahil Shuri. Oh, there, okay, thank you.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hello, my name is Sahil Suri. I'm speaking to you today as a youth who has experience with poverty and living in a high-risk area downtown. I grew up in TCHC and experienced barriers due to living in a low-income area. I am concerned that once I can no longer pay student fare on the TTC, I won't be able to afford the full fare. I support the full funding of the low-income transit pass to help people like me. This would be $4.6 million well spent. Low-income riders would be able to get to job interviews and other important services. I am concerned that friends of mine are in high need of child care subsidies. They had to put their children in daycare that they could not afford. The city needs more subsidies for these parents. To go to work, these women had to spend money they didn't have, which meant they didn't have enough money to live on. We know that 1 in 4 children in Toronto live in poverty. I support the call from Toronto Can Do Better that we have 1,000 new child care spaces. And these spaces should all have subsidies for low-income parents. I recently tried to apply for a subsidized housing unit in TCHC and was told that it could be up to a 10-year wait. This forced me out of TCHC and I had to get a second job while I am tackling being a full-time college student. This is very overwhelming emotionally for a young woman who is trying to get ahead. When I was younger, I went to Harvard Collegiate and we got lunch tickets. Kids from public housing got these meal tickets. It was then easier for us to get healthy meals, which benefited me as a student. I was able to stay awake and concentrate on my studies more. I picked up smoking because I was not as hungry after I had a cigarette. I think the city should move ahead with expanding the student nutrition program by $2.1 million. This would also benefit young people at our St. Stephen's Community House to be in reach of healthy lunches. St. Stephen's has to rely too much on donated food, which sometimes end up being stale. I support the city on putting in places I support the City of Toronto putting in place more funding for youth programming through the City of Toronto. As a young person, I really want to see the St. Stephen's Community House and Children's Aid Society get stable core funding for programs that youth need. The final thing that we really need to see funded is the full Toronto poverty reduction strategy. This means that we need more shelter spaces. Youth are having a hard time finding shelter beds and are turned away from shelters. Youth with trauma are finding it hard to get a safe place for shelter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no question. Oh, Councillor Carroll has a question.
Yeah, and I asked you the question because you're speaking to housing and all the other services, but you're speaking as a youth, and so you've got the most to gain, because if we're playing the long game, you'll actually benefit from proceeding with this. I just wanted to ask if there's a lot of understanding out there, because we've listened to a lot of speeches about housing today. We haven't really stopped people to say, do you mean TCHC social housing, or do you mean affordable housing? There are all the different types. And we get confused when we're making speeches. In TCHC, there are a lot of units that we simply need to fund the repair of, and we would have a significant percentage back on the books and move some of the people in off the waiting list. There's also investing in how we manage the waiting list. If we had enough staff to go back and check in with every family on the waiting list every 3 to 4 years, we'd find, what is your new situation? What do you need now? And be much more current in what we need. You're looking for us to be investing in all those things so that all of these things start to improve, the overall housing situation?
Well, I mean, recently, well, I don't know if it's recently, but I believe when I was speaking to the board at the community that I live at personally, they informed me that there was changes made where homes were no longer separated. So before it was where if you were already on a housing lease, you were able to separate from your family and get your own lease.
Right.
And you didn't have to wait that time limit. My thing is, I feel like, yeah, everyone deserves housing, but once you're already in housing, you shouldn't be taken off right away and told, oh, well, you're an adult now, so you have to wait with everybody else, whereas I am a youth, I am in school. At the time, I was going through a lot more barriers than I am now, and it was just like, because I wasn't able to get housing, and because maybe someone else older than me that could have done better longer than I could have off of housing, I had to find shelter space or a home to stay at, whereas I didn't have enough time I didn't have enough time for school at that moment because I was so worried about, okay, where am I going to be staying? So I feel like...
And if we're also adding that, for that older person that you raised in your example, that affordable level of housing, that keeps them from needing TCHC units, just the supplement that allows them at a low income to live in a private apartment building would leave space for you. So you want us to address both of those?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Sahil.
Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation. Next is Heather McGregor, and after that will be Colette Prevost. Welcome.
Good morning. So I'm not Heather McGregor, I'm Colette Prevost, so just for the record. So my name is Colette Prevost, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Communications at YWCA Toronto, which is the city's largest multi-service women's organization. We help women escape and recover from violence, move out of poverty, and access safe and affordable housing. We also work with young girls to build their leadership and critical thinking skills. Our association serves over 13,700 women and girls annually. We also shelter and house almost 1,400 women and children every year. I'm here today to emphasize the need for a gender equity lens in budget processes and decisions, looking at all of our revenues and spending in terms of who it helps and who it hurts, not just in terms of how much it costs. In 2016, Council adopted a motion that mandates a gender equity lens in the budget process. Yet here we are in 2018 with limited results. Like many of us here today, we are concerned about growing poverty and income inequality in our city. The women who attend our programs tell us of the challenges they face, challenges of accessing childcare, safe housing, nutritious food, public transit. Today, I'll focus on the housing crisis to demonstrate why a gender-responsive city budget is so desperately needed. Access to housing and experiences of homelessness differ on the basis of gender. Women are more likely to live on low incomes. They're also more likely to live to old age, live with children, and seek shelter due to violence. Many women are reluctant to turn to co-ed or overpopulated shelters because they are places that they consider to be unsafe. They will try to couch surf with friends, stay with family members, or may unfortunately return to abusive homes. Of the women who do turn to shelters, over 50% do so with children. Children require specialized supports and living arrangements. Most co-ed shelters are not appropriate places for children, and warming centers do not respond to the needs of women and their children. Women fleeing gender-based violence cite the lack of affordable quality housing as the #1 reason why they cannot leave abusive relationships. So again, women are limited in where they go. As you know, YWCA Toronto operates a women's homeless shelter, which is consistently at capacity. And as we have made clear to Council many times, the nonprofit community is bearing a huge responsibility and weight for the funding for emergency shelter programs in this city. The current funding formula is insufficient and relies on someone other than government to fund what is essentially a human right. Gender-blind or gender-neutral decision-making in the budgeting process means that the nuances of specific needs of many groups of women are lost. By not providing enough safe and adequate gender-responsive housing and shelter options, our system is leaving women and children in unsafe and precarious situations. To end gender-based homelessness, violence, and inequalities, we require a budgeting process that is centered on the needs of women. Public resources should be allocated to agreed-upon strategic priorities, and achieving gender equality should be one of those priorities. Therefore, we ask Council to take the following actions. Prioritize the implementation of the approved gender equity lens in all budgetary decisions and processes. Invest in a continuum of housing options for women that include funded staff supports. Collect and publish data disaggregated by gender, race, immigration status, and other variables, and adopt new revenue tools to fund strategies that Council has already approved and would positively impact the lives of women, including the poverty reduction strategy. Finally, this year's budget does not go far enough towards remedying the disparities that women in Toronto face. What we really need is for Council to take the rights of women seriously and make measurable commitments to invest. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Davis had a question.
You, at the end, talked about new revenue tools and presumably to invest in a range of services, and one of them I know the YWCA cares a lot about, as do I, is childcare. Are you aware this budget actually does not include the 825 new subsidies that have been funded by the provincial government?
I am aware of that.
It's sitting in the not included column, even though it's fully funded.
I am aware of that, and it's quite disheartening considering that we in Toronto have one of the highest, if not the highest, childcare rate in Canada, which is critical for families in general, but specifically for women who we know are more often the sources of support for children, compounded by the fact that women are also the lower wage earners and oftentimes part-time occupancy of work. So the fact that childcare spaces are limited and that access to childcare when you do have it is unsustainable for a lot of families, and particularly for women, is critical in this city.
Right. I agree, thank you. The other thing that's quite disheartening for me is that the City of Toronto took the leadership to approve a 10-year strategy, which was a very prudent and phased-in approach to serving half of the children of Toronto, reducing the fees by up to 50%, and expanding the number of licensed spaces. And the City of Toronto made a commitment to match federal provincial dollars with 20% contribution from the City of Toronto. Are you aware that 20% contribution is not included in this budget either?
I am aware of that, and I think it certainly goes back to the issue of creating public policies, and socially interested policies is one part of the equation, which is done when we develop strategies like the poverty strategies and the childcare strategies. But not attaching funding formulas directly to these strategies render public policies in fact futile and maybe more dangerous or more ineffective in the long run. So essentially, what we understand to be of issue here is making sure that equity is embedded in all of the process of not only budgeting but setting social policies for the City of Toronto, and essentially at all levels of government, quite frankly.
When you said that the YWCA supported additional revenue tools, does that include increasing property tax?
It does include increasing property tax.
It does?
Property taxes, yes, it does. So
Okay.
we need to look at the revenue tools that are available to us, certainly examining the decision-making in both areas of budgeting, including the capital budget and the operating budget. So when we exclusively look at the operating budget as a means of addressing social issues, then we will inadvertently fall short. So what we have to remember is that making decisions and setting priorities come before budgeting. It comes in policy setting, and setting policies that are set and embedded in these processes are imperative and in fact critical.
Right.
Essentially, it is the central focus of gender-based and equity-based budgeting.
Exactly. So establishing service plans, strategies, and then committing to fund them. And I think what you're saying is that's not what we've done with this budget.
That's not what we've done, but what we've also done, I believe, is the risk of pitting one equity-seeking group against another. So when you have a list of priorities or a list of strategies that are unfunded, and the question goes to what do we fund, that's the wrong question. It's not what should we fund, it's how do we fund it. If we've set it as a priority, if we've measured the reasons why, if we understand that this is how we're going to move the city forward in an equity measured way, then we will have the data to provide the analysis, and we will have an opportunity to monitor whether or not these targets are reasonable and are reaching us to a greater equity. Putting the hallmark of of oppression, in fact, is pitting one group of disadvantaged people against another. And this is what we risk this budget to do, and what we risk these stacking strategies that are unfunded. We risk actually pitting groups of people against each other.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Next will be Julia Lipan. Or Lipan, Julia Lipan or Lipan. Okay, next will be Jacoba Knappen.
Hi, good morning.
Welcome, Jacoba.
Thank you very much for seeing me this morning. I'm from Ward 20. I'm the Executive Director at TAPA. Thank you for participating recently in the annual Arts Day at the City. TAPA led the Friends of the Arts Network in our annual Advocacy Day. It should be noted we met with a majority of city councillors that day. We met with a record number of 36 city councillors. And thank you to those of you who participated. This morning I'm here to reiterate our request for City Council to include the final installment of $2 million in the 2018 budget in support of arts and culture in Toronto. The success and the growth of the culture sector, supported by City Council's investment to date, has been integral to building Toronto's global brand and our reputation as one of the most livable cities in the world. The culture sector generates $11.8 billion in Ontario's GDP, and it employs over 174,000 people. Every $1 that is invested by the city in the not-for-profit arts sector generates $8.25 in earned revenues. And then there's an additional $11.77 from other levels of government and the private sector. The TAPA Stats report reported 2.4 million tickets were sold at a value of $189 million. The Nordicity report recently supported that culture funding has increased community arts participation up 34% to over 400,000 community participants. So the numbers, and I know you're the budget committee and you know the numbers very well, are quite impressive. I brought a video with me and I found out I couldn't show you the video, unfortunately. So I want to tell you what's on the video. No, apparently I have the stick, but I'll send you the link. But the video was put together by David Hine and Irene Sankoff because I wanted to talk to you about how culture affects us all through our societal impact in much more meaningful and deep relationships that occur in every day through TAPA member companies. One of the examples is the Cahoots Theatre Project. They have the Deaf Artist and Theatre Toolkit. It's a comprehensive, free online toolkit for level of engagement of hard of hearing and deaf artists, including audiences. The Mixed Company Theatre Company continues to produce socially relevant theatre that's a tool for positive interaction to educate youth, and in particular youth at risk. There is, of course, Workman Arts that works with the understanding of mental illness and living with addiction through the creation and presentation and the discussion of mental health. There's also the Regent Park School of Music that strives to give as many kids as possible the opportunity for a music education, removing financial obstacles. There's Dancing with Parkinson's, a Toronto dance class for those people that are living with Parkinson's disease through the National Ballet, and Caja de Dance Porch View Dances that engages communities in neighborhoods with artists where art happens in neighborhoods on front porches. So absolutely, arts and culture has an impact beyond the numbers, which are impressive, as I've just listed them to you. And we are really calling on you to help us get to that $25 per capita. We've been working together with you for 14 years. It was 14 years ago that I started to talk about the $25 per capita, at that time matching Montreal. We're nearly there. We're almost there, so thank you so much, and we are asking for you to keep your commitment to get us to the final $2 million in arts funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
And in what year did Montreal get to $25 per capita?
Well, at the time, they were already at $25 per capita, which is why we...
Way back in the 1900s?
Which is why we collectively selected that number, because it was based on a hard number. We are hoping to find out what the new numbers are. There are only anecdotal numbers coming out of the other cities right now. It would be a great thing if City Council could push for a city comparator report. That would be really helpful for us to all understand where we actually sit with Montreal, Vancouver, Ottawa, Edmonton. We don't know right now.
Right. And a good apples to apples, and then actually measured against the vitality of their economy would tell us where we need to set the goal.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you. But that, in and of itself, would cost just a few dollars to prepare, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and we recognize that that is part of the challenge and the delay of the City Comparators report. The Hill Strategies were the ones that put out the report the first time. We really, really need to get those numbers updated.
Right. But a little adjustment. We've ordered a report. Now that we have Global Toronto, this committee did order a report. We don't need to do a lot of the travel for foreign direct investment anymore. You could simply, out of that budget alone, the trade missions will be done by another body. We could actually take that and shift it into this type of research to be goal setting and policy setting. Would that be a goal that, that the arts community could get behind?
Absolutely, that would be a goal we would support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacoba.
Thank you.
Next is Frank Ragmagnano, sorry.
Good morning. We will be really brief this morning. While we continue to be concerned that the Toronto Fire Service and its firefighters are year after year being asked to do more with the same or less resources as we watch our city grow, having said that, we understand the budget constraints that this committee faces and council faces. For the most part, we can support the proposed budget as long as service levels are not further reduced through this process. The one area of concern we do have is the exclusion of proposed funding to roll out our Road to Mental Readiness training to our frontline firefighters and staff. This past February, a report titled Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder and Suicide Prevention Mental Health Support for First Responders, Executive Report 23.4. The report to the Executive Committee was from the City Manager and the Executive Director of Human Resources. The Ministry of Labour estimates that first responders are twice as likely as the general population to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. The Supporting Ontario's First Responders Act, which was released in April of 2016, required the development of a PTSD prevention plan by employers of workers who are covered by the presumptive legislation. Research suggested that post-traumatic stress disorders result in more suicide attempts than any other anxiety disorder. Employers, labor, and mental health experts all agree that prevention is critical. Employers of workers covered under the Act were required to provide the Ministry of Labour with their post-traumatic stress prevention plans by April 23, 2017. The report, which was supported by Executive Committee and Council last spring, included the following: identify and secure the funding required to roll out Road to Mental Readiness training to all staff and provide reference materials to all fire service work locations. The R2MR was also a component of the same plans for Toronto Police and the Toronto Paramedic Services. With me this morning is Hugh Doherty. Hugh is an acting district chief in suppression, but more importantly, a key individual working with firefighters facing and living with mental health issues related to post-traumatic stress and its preventance in our profession. Hugh volunteers. He is the person I call when I get a call with a firefighting telling me that they're at their last rope, that they're looking to do self-harm and want help. With that, I'll turn it over to Hugh for some comments.
Good morning. It's an honor to appear before the body this morning in regards to the Road to Mental Readiness, which I'm going to refer to as R2MR. The value in providing the funding and the training to all TFS staff is invaluable. R2MR has been endorsed by the Canadian Mental Health Association. The advantages of an 8-hour R2MR training course, it's going to improve some short-term performance and long-term mental health outcome for the men and women of the Toronto Fire Services. It will reduce barriers to care and encourage early access, and additionally, it will reduce stigma and permit self-reporting. It will provide the tools and resources required to manage and support TFS employees who may be experiencing mental illness, and additionally assist TFS supervisors in maintaining their own mental health, as well as promoting a positive mental health environment for the men and women of the TFS. The goal in training the 3,300 members of the Toronto Fire Service with the R2MR program, again, is to support the mental health and well-being of first responders, firefighters. This includes our dispatchers, fire investigators, fire prevention staff, and also TFS senior staff. To enable the full productivity of employees, it will assist in the reduction of absences, which includes sick time, LTD, and WSIB costs. Also, it will ensure that the workplace is respectful and inclusive of all employees, including those with mental health issues and suffering from mental illness. To encourage employees to seek help for mental health problems, and mental health illness. And it will provide avenues for early intervention, which is critical to an individual suffering from PTSD or PTSI. The investment in providing the necessary funding for R2MR can be best illustrated through some actual TFS experiences. As an example, in the province of Ontario, suicides for emergency personnel last year in 2017, there was 46 first responders and 10 members. TFS, since amalgamation, has had approximately 30 firefighters die by suicide, and we use the word approximately due to the stigma, as many family members don't want to talk about the death of a loved one by suicide. In 2017, as a result of the legislation, we saw 49 cases submitted to WSIB. 47 of those were improved. The total.
We'll have to wrap up, please.
Okay. In conclusion, the funding will reduce absences, our claims will be decreased. The reduction of one single WSIB claim will indeed pay for the entire training of our 3,300 members of TFS.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll had a question. Actually, Councillor Davis first.
Oh, okay. She's probably going to ask what I was going to ask anyway. Go for it.
Councillor Davis had her hand up first, so I'll let you. This is the deputations.
The unpredictability is. So could I just hear that again? I'm sure question. 92,000 to do this project.
Correct.
Okay, and I'm just looking at the suicide prevention report. So it came to council and was approved, and then it's just not being funded.
It's under the line, as you say.
Right. So one of the things that I do here as well is I co-chair the Occupational Health and Safety Coordinating Committee, and one of the key issues that we hear about at that table is our mental health issues in the workplace, and we have an existing policy to address mental health and other issues. So do you see this as supporting our mandate to support employees under occupational health and safety?
Yes, the fact that it was endorsed by the executive committee, that the report went forward, I feel a little betrayed because I signed off on our plan with the ministry saying, here's what we're going to be doing moving forward, under good faith, thinking that it was all approved and it would be funded. So I was shocked when now I find out that the budget wasn't there to actually do what we told the government we would be doing, because they do have an interest, because it does have presumptive legislation to it. And
right.
So I don't know if the funding isn't there, what the government will actually do in the future, saying, well, we can't be funding something if it isn't have any preventive maintenance with it.
Right, so this is intended to prevent a larger potential cost because of the new presumptive legislation, which could mean more firefighters on long-term disability.
Correct, and we've already started, so it makes it a little worse because we started the program, we launched it to our senior management, we launched it to our district chiefs, and now we're going to stop it before giving it to the frontline firefighters.
You're kidding. Oh. The other thing, okay. The other thing that's not included under firefighters is Employment Systems Review Inclusion Plan, 200,000. Do you know what that is?
I believe that's a management request for them to kind of report some of the reportables that council's asking for and the resources that the fire chief needs in order to do that.
So is it the inclusion plan that's intending to hire and increase diversity in our?
Correct. Right now, we have nobody in our recruitment division. It's something that the fire chief, one way or another, with money or without money, needs to address. We've been willing to sit down, and we've had some discussions with him on how we could address it with no money, but obviously being able to fund it as other divisions are funded, that we keep being shown as examples of how we need to behave. It's kind of hard to do it when we don't have the funding that they do.
Okay. But you would acknowledge we've put a lot of money into hiring additional fire services employees who do inspection in public education.
That's starting with our new class in February, so we welcome that. It'll be 50 firefighters that'll be cross-trained. I think the TFS management, for the resources that they've had, have done a tremendous job on the diversity, but I know it's far short of where we would want to be and where the city wants to be. But without the necessary resources, it's going to take us longer and longer to get there.
You're saying the last firefighters are being cross-trained to be both, as you say, on the trucks and also doing fire inspection,
Yes,
prevention, and education?
Correct. They will be taking the burden off our fire prevention division by doing re-inspection program, and they're going to be fully trained to NFPA standards.
Okay, so some of the fire regularly or suppression force will be reassigned to do that kind of work?
They'll be doing suppression duties, but they'll also be doing fire prevention duties.
Okay. Yeah, I heard that. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll?
So we've been pretty tough on your budget in the past, and you've come back and sort of asked us to overturn the whole proposed budget and open a division that was proposed for closure and things like that. All you're asking for this time is basically $92,000 to do this mental readiness thing. You're prepared to go away and look at the inclusion plan for another day. You just want to get this road to mental readiness.
To us, that you know, it's important, the inclusion, obviously, but this has direct impact on people's lives and their safe and well-being, and that's why we made it a priority. As far, I don't want to speak for the fire service, because I can tell you the fire chief is very adamant that, you know, the budget that he presented, including the money he needs to work on the inclusion part, is very important to administrate, and it is very important. But we looked at it as, you know, if we had to pick on anything on the budget, what affects the life and safety, and that's the one item that we feel would help. You know, quite frankly, last year, we had a horrific year. We had 9 active members pass. I've been to too many funerals. I've spoken at funerals of suicides, and I'd like to avoid them as much as possible. And that's why we endorsed this plan moving forward, which we thought was a step in the right direction. There was actually a report that compared us to the police and EMS, and the report clearly showed that we were third, well behind in the work that they've already done. The Toronto Police Service, as far as I know, have already received all this training, and we're being cut from that opportunity.
Yeah, and the most it'll ever cost. We've got the 3-year cost here, and the most it's ever. Even after you annualize it, the most this is ever going to cost us is a little over 150 grand.
Correct.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you.
We're going to, I just, with your willingness, colleagues, I'm just going to veer the schedule. We have a gentleman here who came on Wheel-Trans, and he's asked to come up at this point to do that. His name is Adam Roy Cahoon. If you just give us a sec here, we're going to prepare.
Hello, Budget Committee and everybody in the gallery. Today is January 10th, and it is 21 days till the end of the month, and already a good little chunk of people on ODSP and OW are already out of money. I know that for a fact because one of my closer friends, and they usually do this, especially in January, sent me an email. Adam, can you send me an Interact transfer? Just some money. And they sent me a screenshot of their bank account. It's at, somehow they were able to get it to -$5, and they don't have overdraft protection, but they were. But my point in this is we really need to cover definitely the fair pass. It will let some of us get out on these cold winter days where we are fighting depression. Most of us are not eating well this month, so our already fragile mental state from living on the poverty line are that much more taxed. This is a month where we actually, at the start of the new year, rather than having hope, are brought back to our ancestors' archaic just living for survival, because that's what we're doing, strategizing every day to figure out what we're gonna do at the end of the month. This is the weird month where I weirdly actually hanker McDonald's. On a cold day, I hanker McDonald's. Usually I don't like that junk food, but because in January and February, when your budgets are tight, that's the month when I use the arch cards that my relatives give me because they think I'm still 10 years old and will eat. But I use them. I use the Tim Hortons card because even though I make sure I have a bit of money in my account, I even have to script, and I give a little bit to friends. I give a little bit. And the one thing that you guys can give is you guys can definitely give on transit. Transit should be paid for freely. I'm a person in a wheelchair. Even I can get my internet covered. I can get everything covered. I pretty much, short of maybe having to spend $10 on my Netflix subscription, basically can live with a lot covered for entertainment. I'm lucky. I live in a nice co-op. I actually have a nice deep freezer. So this year I've got a lot of frozen food that will let me get through these months. But the poverty reduction strategy will let more of us get further along. And transportation-wise, it's a good start, and we need at least that start, but it needs to be down to around $1. And so I don't want my friends walking when there's extreme cold weather alerts again to get to certain things, but they are going to have to do that if they've run out of tokens. It's awful. It's sad. And stuff. And to think you guys only want to take a little piece of the poverty reduction strategy every so often and put money towards it when we need it covered. This is the only month when I really say to myself, I'm poor. Look at my clothes, look at everything else. People wouldn't notice I'm poor, but I am poor this month because that's the month when I have to live strategically. I forget which author said it. It's harder to live. It's harder to live poor than it is to be a working rich man.
Thank you very much for your words. Councillor Carroll has a question for you.
Adam, thank you so much for coming, because it isn't easy to do on Wheel-Trans and then meet our meandering schedule. Do you, have you ever tracked, how often do you need transit in a month? If you were always able to afford it, how many trips do you think you'd be taking? Have you ever counted?
Actually, interestingly, I have, because I make sure I get out about 2 to 3 times a week for my own mental sanity, And in a month like this, most of those trips are taken on wheel trans. Interestingly enough, today, because we're in the middle of a nice January thaw, I am probably gonna just wheel home after this deputation and actually calm down. But usually so I'm usually using I'd say about $60 a month.
Right. So, and 2 to 3 times a week. If we get the low-income fare off the ground, it doesn't mean you're going to double or triple the amount of rides you take. It just means you're going to be able to afford. It's not going to burden the system anymore.
It's going to also mean that at the end of the month, I won't have friends lying and saying certain things when really the reason why they won't come is because they can't even afford a token and are too ashamed to even do that. Take the envelope trick, and I'll give them because I have loads of tokens. I also have 3 Presto cards, and I also have a supportive family that is pretty supportive of me. Maybe they'll be a little less supportive when they realize some of the money they are helping me with actually end up going out of my budget to other people, but hopefully they'll understand that it is real charity that we need to give.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Adam, thank you very much for coming in today. Next is Nova Bhattacharya.
Budget Chief, City Councilors, thank you for taking the time to hear me and so many others today. My name is Nova Bhattacharya. I am an artist, and I am the volunteer president of the board of Toronto Arts Council. And you already know that I am here to say that the arts are an essential pillar of a vital city. As members of the Budget Committee, you know this, and you know you have an important responsibility to invest in the future of Toronto. We know Toronto is one of the best cities in the world to live. Visiting artists from around the world keep telling me that Toronto makes them feel safe and inspires them to hope for the future. We know Toronto's artists maintain and improve our vitality while creating resilience to some of the threats facing us today. Beyond the obvious contributions the arts make to Toronto's beauty and quality of life, I am here to point out that they also have a huge impact on equity and inclusion, health and well-being, and income stability and prosperity. As our mayor proudly notes, Toronto is the most diverse city in the world. He is also quick to add that the arts are the ultimate unifying force in the world's most diverse city. People of many cultures have lived here for many years, and for years they have been enjoying the arts together. Galleries, music concerts, dance performances, these are the places that Toronto's communities come together to share experiences. In addition, thanks to recent funding increases, events are often available at very low or no cost, giving Torontonians from every neighborhood the opportunity to enjoy the arts in their local communities. Equity means equality for everyone who lives in Toronto, and Toronto Arts Council has been focusing on equity in the arts sector since 1992, when we published Cultural Equity by Betty Julian. I am proud to say that we continue to take a leadership role, and just last year formalized our equity policies within a bold new framework. Health and well-being. So many of my fellow deputants have spoken to you about mental health concerns, and there are so many stories in the news about this. And there have also been many reports about the correlation of arts participation with improved mental health. Whether it is active art creation, such as painting in your home, or participation as an audience member, numerous studies have found that being active in the arts for as little as 2 hours a week has a significant positive effect on mental health. And finally, income stability and prosperity. This one is a double-edged sword for artists. We absolutely support those who are here today reminding us of the importance of a strong poverty reduction plan for Toronto. Toronto's artists, while among the most celebrated, highly skilled of our city's residents, are also among the poorest, with average incomes for many well below the poverty line. You may have seen recently Michael Redhill posting his bank statement that had $411 in it before he won the Giller Prize. And yet, our artists, innovators, and creators bring income stability and prosperity not just for our sector, the arts sector, but for the city as a whole. We have seen artists' dreams turn into great organizations that become major employers and magnets for business and tourists. International head offices are coming here because they know Toronto is a place that embraces art and culture, and they know in our diversity of demographics they're going to find the innovative and creative people they need to work for them. Budget Chief, City Councillors, you already know what I am going to say. The city that Toronto aspires to be needs you to fulfill your final $2 million commitment to arts funding in the 2018 budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Nova. Seeing no questions. Oh, Councillor Carroll.
So Nova, refresh my memory, and I'm not trying to make these trick questions. I really need my memory refreshed. If I look in the new and enhanced list, it says what we need to get there for the grants program alone is $500,000. But you also need to administrate the grant program. You also need to address inflation, as happens in any organization. So the ask here is not just about getting to the 25 per capita, but it's keeping the whole organization going so that all the programs that we've started with the fund so far can keep going and keep being administrated.
Absolutely. I'm actually about to leave here and go and host a free dance event at the Sony Centre for the Performing Arts, which was funded by one of the new programs that came through.
Right.
So there are many innovative programs being come up with at the Toronto Arts Council to benefit this city, and we need to move forward in that direction.
We need to move forward. If we don't move forward, though, we're both not getting to the per capita, but we're also not addressing inflation in terms of the requests coming forward. So what happens then to some of the extra streams that have been started up, the Arts in the Park, the Indigenous arts programs, the things that have been started when we started this move to 25 per capita? If we don't carry on the program, do we start marching backwards?
There's definitely the risk of that because there are so many new artists in the city, there are so many new ideas, there are so many new programs that can really feed and support the vibrancy here. So we risk sliding backwards, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly. So I hear clearly the request for the outstanding $2 million to get us to $25 per capita. Once we've reached that target, what should we be aspiring to do next? So come next year, so I hear that request, and the budget chief has been very strong on the issue of the arts, so I recognize we're probably there this year. What's the request next year going to be?
The arts are an essential part of this city, and we're always going to have a vibrant, expressive arts and culture community who is always going to be trying to service this city through their work. And the numbers, Claire Hopkinson, the executive director of TAC, is going to speak to you next, and she's going to have a lot of numbers for you. I'm just going to say the arts are absolutely critical to this city's lifeblood, and we need you to continue supporting them every year.
Great. Okay. And I'll hold those questions on the numbers then for the future for Claire.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Claire Hopkinson, and she'll probably have some numbers.
Numbers, gal. Councillors, Budget Chief, thanks again for taking the time to hear me and from other committed Torontonians today. So as you know, my name is Claire Hopkinson, otherwise known as Numbers Gal, and I'm the Director and CEO of Toronto Arts Council, which, as you know, is the city's primary arts granting organization. Each year, we adjudicate over 2,000 applications, dispersing some $18 million in grants to over 1,000 arts organizations and individual artists. And I'd like to begin by commending City Council for your support of the arts in Toronto. We have come a long way in the last 4 years, and Council deserves credit for implementing a strong arts agenda. And 2013 was a turning point. After as you've heard, than a decade of reports, funding comparisons with other cities, vibrant city engagement from Toronto's young artists, and council motions dating back to 2003, City Council committed a plan for increased investment to be rolled out between 2013 and 2017. The final $2 million for the implementation of this plan is yet to be confirmed, and we encourage you strongly to include it in the 2018 budget. However, the initial results from the increased funding were reported on by Nordicity at Economic Development Committee this past November. The findings, I'm happy to say, were very positive. I will highlight just two. Number one, there's been a significant increase in arts programming outside the downtown core. In 2016, TAC grants supported over 500 performances, exhibitions, arts events throughout the inner suburbs. The second finding is economic. Since 2013, arts grants provided to Toronto's most established organizations have increased by $6 million. In the same period, those organizations have raised an additional $50 million in revenues from other sources. Clearly, city funding is a major catalyst. In terms of Toronto Arts Council, our grants program funding of $18 million is equivalent to just $6.48 per Torontonian. Through our competitive jury process, it's achieving great impact. New funding is allowing us to introduce programs that increase accessibility and inclusion for artists and audiences throughout the entire city. In 2016, 73 grants to youth-led arts projects gave over 2,500 talented young people the chance to lead and participate in arts programming outside the downtown core. And in 2017, we were able to launch a newcomer and refugee artist program. And this has offered support and mentorship opportunities to exceptional artists arriving in Toronto from around the world. Many councillors were able to join us at our Arts in the Parks, which was launched in 2016 in partnership with Toronto Parks, Forestry and Recreation, and we received additional support from the Mayor's Evening for the Arts. And over the last 2 years, Arts in the Parks has brought 593 arts performances, exhibitions, screenings, and events to parks all over the city, to the great delight of almost 200,000 Torontonians. So not surprisingly, Toronto's artists and arts organizations have responded with energy and creativity to TAC's newer programs. Indeed, ideas and applications for support have doubled over the last few years. What will Toronto gain by sustaining the commitment and investing the further $2 million in the arts in 2018? We will gain the opportunity to have these funds matched by significant new federal and provincial arts funding. We will gain the benefits and innovation and inspiration that artists bring to Toronto. By supporting our designers, our creators, and artists, in short, supporting the knowledge economy, together we are firmly establishing Toronto as a centre for innovation. Our artists and creative thinkers create their own jobs by and large, and they create opportunities for many others. So I encourage you, on behalf of the Board of Toronto Arts Council, on behalf of the artists of the city and the audiences, to meet City Council's 2003 commitment and achieve $25 per capita arts funding by including the further final $2 million in the 2018 budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. Councillor Cressy.
So thank you, Claire, and message heard loud and clear as it relates to honoring our $25 commitment and the outstanding $2 million this year. The question I'm looking towards next year in the future, what are other comparable cities and what's their per capita arts funding right now? Other comparable Canadian cities or world cities?
So the comparisons have to be done, as we've said before, by apples to apples, and that's not an easy task, and the city is engaged to do that. The last reliable number I had of around Montreal's arts funding some years ago was $55 per capita. It's increased since then. Certainly Toronto is behind by a significant margin of many major cities. However, other cities have more capital investments as opposed to Toronto, which has more investment into the actual arts programs. So I think until we have a new study, it's hard to make that absolute comparison. But I would say that if Toronto was up to $50 per capita, we would be in fair standing competitively with other major cities.
And so then when we come through this project during the next budget cycle, by that point, should we as councillors anticipate that the Toronto Arts Council will have a target established? We're honoring the 2003 target, but will we have a 2030 target or something like that, or 25?
So the Toronto Arts Council has done a strategic plan in the last year, and we want to be up to $40 million for the Toronto Arts Council alone within the next 5 years. Okay. And of course, there are other funding programs, and we will let them establish as they look at their own benchmarks and growth patterns.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Next is Heather Nicholson Morrison. Heather Nicholson Morrison. Okay, next, the next four deputants come from Friends Helping People End Poverty. They're all going to come up and depute together. There is Leona Lau, Charlotte Nibagera, Mike Connell, and Nina Labouchang.
Excuse me for interrupting, but she would like to go first.
Oh, that's fine.
She has to go back to work.
Yep, no problem. Any? So there's the four of you. Is it four? You can all come up at the table if you want together.
Charlotte. I think there's only three of us.
Okay, that's fine. Just introduce yourself just before you speak.
Hello. My name is Ina Labouchang, and I'm a citizen of your Toronto. I would like to start by saying thank you for letting us speak, and then just to talk about my own personal experience. 4 years ago, I was living in a tent on the Don Valley, and due to some mental health things, I have found myself, back on my feet. I'm living at the CRC 40 Oak Street, which is, I also work there. So I work in the advocacy office, and I see a lot of, I deal with a lot of the homeless issues and a lot of the mental health issues, and I would just like to say that it is a very serious thing that you guys are, I don't know, for some reason we have really outcry for these warming centers or for places where people can go. And what we're finding is that they're cutting the hours and they're cutting the centers down. So then you have the problem with the shelters, et cetera. But I was gonna say all this stuff, and then I heard Mr. Rosenberg speak, and it just feels like that really, it's kind of redundant. I mean, like, if you guys would look at your budget and how we spend it with these computers, et cetera, it just kind of makes me frustrated. And the frustration is that I feel that really seriously, it's just kind of, here we're sitting and we're pouring out our hearts, and then to find out if you guys just wouldn't buy new computers one year, that everything that every single person here is talking about could be funded. I mean, that really makes me think, well, wow, that is really deep thought right there. And I don't understand why you smart people here wouldn't have figured that out sooner. I mean, it's taken one person here to tell you this. I was like, okay, we can go home because obviously the problem could be fixed. But I mean, so I just wanted to speak to you just to say really seriously that, I mean, let's just look at where we're spending our money. It does seem awful crazy to me that the amount of budgets, and then to, you know, just to think that that amount of money and then still things, we don't have shelters, we don't have, you know, meals. People are struggling so with their housing, with, I mean, you have families living all together in one bedroom houses. I don't know. And so that's just where I'm at with that. I just think that really let's just look at where we're spending the money and change it.
Thank you. Yeah, next. We'll do all three and then we'll ask questions.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Leona Lowe, and I'm from Ward 28. I am a member of Friends Helping People and Property. I would like to thank the Budget Committee for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Today, I am here to speak about the need to invest in the poverty reduction strategy, since the PRS was passed by all members of Council in November of 2015. Very little investment has been funded. I need this funding because it is a way to support people who are in poverty, because they don't get enough support, especially in affordable housing. I currently live in a very good income apartment, and I know I am extremely fortunate to be where I am. I am grateful that the city has provided this for people who need it. Unfortunately, I know many people who are trying or are on the waiting list still cannot get a place. For example, my niece Julie is living in a room for $400 a month, and she is living in hard times because the landlord wouldn't let her use the stove, and she has very little access to the fridge. Julie really wants to get out of this situation arrangement because this is not an ideal living situation. Please, so she will be moving in with me at the end of the month. Julie and many others are left having to wait for a very long time to get good sense of housing, affordable housing. Julie is living under the poverty line, and after her monthly rent is paid, there isn't enough money left over for things like neutral foods, medication, and phone bills. She is working from contract to contract, and there is absolutely no job security. How can she survive, she says? The city is too unaffordable to live in. The shelters are just not the solution. Money needs to be invested in buildings for more affordable housing. The idea of a TO prosperity is to have a vision for our city where we fight against poverty. However, looking at Joy's situation without any significant investment in the strategy in 2018, the city budget, nothing will change. This doesn't have to be this way. You can locate funding, and you can also generate more revenue by increasing property taxes above the rates of inflation, or to improve revenue tools such as introducing motor vehicle registration tax. Please, councils, please consider the situation like Joey and thousands of other people in our great city. We make a decision in the budget, as you make a decision in the budget. We need you to start equity funding and poverty strategy reduction 2018. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlotte, would you like to speak now?
My name is Charlotte Nivikira, Ward 28, downtown Toronto. I am a member of Friends Helping People and Poverty. I thank the Budget Committee for giving me the opportunity to speak on this occasion. Please invest in affordable housing, especially for students who are low income. The students have a difficulty paying for housing because of their low income. They don't have money and the rents are too high. Because the price of the rent is so high, they don't have enough money left over to to buy good, nutritious food. Good eating costs too much for vegetables and fruits, and good meat for proteins. This is why it is also very important to fund the Student Nutrition Program, which is a key component of the poverty reduction strategy. Nutritious food helps kids learn. Research shows that students have trouble learning when they are hungry at school. They are better able to focus and learn if they eat nutritious meals and snacks. Good eating is necessary for good health and for not falling sick often, and also to have a good memory. Please also invest in affordable public transit. When the students spend all their money they have for rent and TTC, that's a big problem because there is no more money left for eating and clothing. Please fund the money for the low-income transit pass. Please also help fund recreation programs such as Swim to Survive, so children do not drown, and put funding in recreation spaces because the wait list is so long. I know City Council has voted for many of these very important plans and strategies, and it's time to fund it in the 2018 budget to improve the quality of life for many Toronto residents. I thank the committee and hope you will fund all of the crucial issues I have addressed today. God bless you all. With my respect. Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? No, you did well. Oh, Councillor Carroll does.
Just one. Michael did talk about us looking at capital, the things we build. If we were to look at what our policies are around those and look for different ways of delivering those, we would actually free up money that right now, in the operating budget, we shift money over there, and we could re-examine that. It wouldn't immediately solve the problem because we'd probably the proposal would probably be to spend a whole year looking at that.
I know.
But what you're saying is to do something like that that's going to give us a sustainable way. Your program, for instance, you want us to find a way not just to help you this year, but to make it possible for you to be able to deliver the service and live within that program year after year after year.
Well, right. I mean, I'm just saying it's not rocket science that like money is wasted on things that maybe, I mean, I think it's a problem with all governments, right? But why not, I mean, why not start the city and change it?
But
why not be leaders?
To know, that in fact, if this year instead of, there will be $55 million in new property tax this year from the new condos. And instead of using that to deliver more services, we're going to plug it into the budget so that we can artificially keep the property tax rate lower than it actually should be to deliver the services you need. We could just take that $55 million and solve every problem that people have spoken of today.
Well, I mean, I'm saying that maybe it would, yes, that's fine.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's many ways that you can do it, but why not look at your base of where you're spending this, where
Exactly.
you know, like, I don't know, I'm just gonna say in reference, in the United States, let's say they were spending $100 per roll of toilet paper, right? Like, I mean, there's always things that are useless wastes of money, and why not at the city level where you guys are pretty close to us, right? I mean, what I mean is you live here too. Like, and you're in a position that you can look at those things and start to call people on it. Hey, you know, like, I mean, it's not rocket science, and it's just something, I mean, I think it's important. And then you wouldn't have to be, you know, pulling money from here and there, and it's just red tape that if just cut out some of the wasted money. That's all I'm saying.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your deputations. Next is Arum Naz. Arum Naz. Next will be Maka Mukarma. Maka Mukarma. Okay. Vijay Paul. Vijay Paul. No, I did see Maureen O'Reilly. Yeah, Maureen's here.
Sorry, it's just opening. I have appeared before this committee countless times over the years to talk about the city's budget. The Toronto Public Library budget is okay this year, as you can be expected in a lead up to an election year. But the budget cuts another 4.5 FTEs. That's jobs, that's lost opportunities. And this is your own graph, by the way. And this is the library's take on that same graph, and I'd like to point out that we disagree with the 14% number in the middle. Our numbers, our calculations put it upward of 17%. The city librarian defends the cuts to 4.5 FTEs as just a small cut, so it's okay. Vacant positions, nobody is getting laid off. It's page positions only. Presumably, those are just high school students. But I have been seeing these graphs for 10 years, and nothing ever changes except the cuts continue. And I ask you why. It's because the politicians in this city are out of step with their constituents. Politicians view the library as a soft service, and they continue to cut its budget, including the staff. Toronto loves their libraries. 19 million visitors came through our doors last year. I'd like to challenge the city councillors, along with the mayor, to see if that many constituents have come through your doors last year. We are the busiest urban library in North America. The workers are a reflection of their community. And by the way, it's kind of unusual, but almost all library workers live in the city of Toronto. We are Torontonians as well. And those library workers want to continue to deliver the service, but they are struggling. I'm going to bring up a series of quotes where we did a survey on understaffing a few years ago. And this survey that we did on understaffing was presented to the library board, and there really wasn't a lot of questions. And a couple years ago, Councillor Mike Layton put forward a motion to look at the library budget through a gender lens. It was dismissed by the library board. This presentation was presented to senior administrators of the library. Instead of entering into a discussion with us, they chose to attack us on our survey methodology instead of dealing with the content. So when and where are we going to discuss this? I have a few more of these slides, and I'll just move through them quickly. But these quotes are the result of 20 years of those little wee tweaks to staffing that you dismiss as not being very important. While the library workers think it's important, our excellent quantitative statistics mask the qualitative argument. Here's a good one, mentions services to newcomers and seniors, two groups that supposedly City Council is very concerned about. These are two groups where programs are already being delivered. There doesn't have to be extra funding. They just need to be supported. But maybe graphs and quotes don't move you. Here is a picture on the day that there was a murder at Main Street Library. Do you think a 4-year-old could go up to the second floor and read this sign? Here is that same library today, and unfortunately that sign on the door says the library is closed until further notice due to a lack of staff. There's been lots of talks this week and a lot of protests today about employers and what they can do for us. And I'd just like to conclude by showing you this video. It's only a minute long. Oops. Sorry. That will sum up my presentation. Sorry, there's no sound.
There are two roads. There are two roads ahead, and one of them leads to a bright future for the Toronto Public Library and the city it serves. Now is the time for more secure jobs within our library system, for a better library, and a better, stronger, more secure Toronto.
Thank you, Maureen. Other questions? Councillor Doucette.
Thank you for coming today, Maureen. And yes, we see you here every day and every year, and thank you for doing that and for coming to the board meetings. Could you give us the percentage of full-time staff versus part-time staff?
It's 50% full-time and 50% part-time. The senior administrators in the library like to dispute the 50% part-time position because they say 600 of those people in the other 50% are just pages. But I want to remind folks that pages are the folks who are members who shelve the books in the libraries. At one time, 30 years ago, when I first started working in a library, they were principally high school students. Now the average age of a page is mid-40s. There are people supporting families on the page salary. So it's 50% part-time.
And what's the percentage out of a staff of men versus women or women versus men?
As the T-shirt says, 75% women, 50% part-time.
Mm-hmm. And with the 19 million people coming through our doors and the biggest library branch everywhere, really, how long does it take an employee, a staff person, to go from a part-time job to a full-time job? On average.
Senior administrators, I've never measured that, but when we did this survey and we asked this regularly every few years, it started off by a minimum of 5 years, and we believe it's up to 10 years now. Before, if you're willing and you want to work for full-time, it takes you 10 years working part-time to get a job, which would put you in your 30s.
If I wanted to come and work at the library, is there an education I have to have, or can I just walk in off a street and say, I love reading, I love books, and I've been a city councillor, do I qualify?
Well, there's over 70 different classifications that work in the library with a broad range of expertise. Librarians, for instance, have to have a master's degree in library science, but our pages, again, who shelve the books principally in the libraries, they do just need to have a grade 10 education. Many of our pages actually have university educations, and many of them are actually librarians working as pages.
Through the budget process at the board, the requests also were under the poverty reduction category, I guess I'll call it, some extra 3 youth hubs, Sunday service hours extended at 5 district branches, which would give them all year round Sunday hours, and at 9 neighborhood branches, and Wi-Fi hotspots. So this is an extra $1.2 million needed in the budget for poverty reduction. I'm assuming that you and your members support this approach the board has taken in that angle.
Well, absolutely, but we'd also like to see the poverty reduction strategy obviously overall funded. But the thing that has happened in the last 3 budget cycles, which really doesn't make the news after the budget process, is the poverty reduction strategy does not get funded, or does not get funded to the extent. The library usually ends up implementing the aspects of the poverty reduction strategy, but it comes out of the regular operating budget. So in fact, it's another form of another cut, despite the importance of that program. And what you don't see again is the cuts to the staffing in order to pay for the poverty reduction strategy under the misnomer that technology will replace the library worker in the delivery of the library service.
So each year we come here and ask to add more items under the poverty reduction. Next year the library will be assumed that that's going to be incorporated into, if it's a 0 increase or a 2% decrease, that has to be incorporated in. That's what you're saying basically, right?
Yes, there's absolutely that, but also in the current year, the last two budget cycles, my understanding of the process was that it wasn't funded. For instance, 1 year, 2 years ago, I believe it was funded, and then there was an across-the-board cut of all the departments. I can't remember the number now.
$1.7 million
yes,
or something, yeah.
Which in effect was the same amount as the budget, poverty reduction strategy. So there again, it wasn't funded.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Davis.
I was quite taken aback by the sign that the Main Street Library was closed due to a lack of staffing. And I know we tried to get at that years ago when I was on the library board about the staffing model. Are there many libraries that, is there a way to understand better how minimally staffed or what kind of a skeleton kind of staffing there is for most of our libraries?
Well, that closure of Main Street probably only happened for an hour or two, but it's going to become a more common experience until they can call part-time staff in to pick up a few extra hours to open it. The library did release a staffing model this year, which to us just shows that the library system is understaffed, because if you did a proper analysis of the work that needs to be performed under public administration principles, it would show the staffing falls short of the work that is being demanded. All it is, again, it's better than what we used to have, but it's still just a current snapshot. And there has been a lot of data added in to measure the strategic plan and the success of the strategic plan. There's no data in there, again, that measures the staffing that is needed to implement the strategic plan. So that still remains unknown.
So is this another plan that's not funded?
Sorry, the branch staffing model?
Strategic plan and the
No, the
branch
strategic
staffing
plan
model.
gets implemented every single year, and every single year we take on more programs, more projects, more whatever. But it's done, if you read those quotes, on the back of that staff who are challenged and suffering and getting tired of keeping up. And because library workers are so dedicated to their communities, they just keep on doing it. But at one point in time, it is going to catch up with the library service, and I think it's already happening.
So at one point, we approved an open hours strategy, which was to actually expand the hours of service to match the growth in our population and the growing needs of our communities. And it was intended at that time that any technology improvements were going to be reinvested in expanding and supporting new staffing. That hasn't happened, has it?
That never happened. Staff continue to be cut. The hours were expanded, and they will be expanded again under the poverty reduction strategy, and there will be no staff added. And this year, the library is implementing a staffless library model in Swansea and Todmorden, not for the entire day, But I will certainly maintain that the library is a people place, and technology should be used to support the library workers in the delivery of the library service, not replace them. And I see that, you know, you have that sign up there. I really shouldn't talk about it because instead of having 2 libraries, you know, the next thing we're going to have is 10 libraries with no staff, 20 libraries with no staff, and then you people are going to start spreading that out to community centers, and who knows what other services in the city.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carroll, then Layton.
Thanks. Councillor Davis and Councillor Doucette, who've both been on the library board, have got into the broad stroke change we need to make there. But I just want to bring it back to the beginning of your deputation, because I think yours is the first deputation where somebody's put it so succinctly. This year's budget, and probably because it's an election year, is just okay. And lots of people in the audience would disagree with you because of the things not included, but there isn't a huge hue and cry because it just sort of feels okay. And your budget is a good example. It says, oh, okay, 4.5 FTEs down, and don't worry yourself about them. But I'm wondering if you could sort of paint the picture of what 4.5 FTEs means if we're talking about a workforce where most of the people in it are part-time. Because I know in my own ward, people get into a routine, and so people tend to come to Fairview Library. They come to it. They probably have a routine, so they're coming the same day every week, and they're seeing some young man or woman working there and thinking they're probably there the rest of the week, but they just happen to be coming in on Thursdays, and that's when Anita is there too, but Anita only has 14 hours a week. So if this budget only says, don't worry about it, we're only taking away 4.5 FTE, and they don't give you, the workers' union, details on that, you're going to halfway through the year discover how many workers lost hours. Do you have an estimate of what that will be?
Well, 4.5 is full-time equivalencies, so that's 4.5 people. Seeing that we're 50% part-time, that would actually represent 9 people working 15 hours a week. And so it's probably more the opportunity being lost for 12 people. Some of our library workers work in, I should say, 80 different branches across the system that they're traveling to in order to cobble together the number of hours, and even then they're still not reaching full-time hours. And then even if they do reach full-time hours, your business model is built on the fact that you're not going to pay those part-timers any benefits or pensions, just like Tim Hortons, and you're saving on that off the backs of the part-time workers.
So you're advocating today for something that might lead to fewer part-time workers, but you think it would be better if the city was a responsible employer giving people real jobs with benefits to run better libraries?
Absolutely, and it is obviously my focus is on the library, but it's for the benefit of the community as a whole. 86% of library workers live in the City of Toronto. We are Torontonians. We are trying to pay our rents. We're trying to, if we're fortunate enough to be homeowners, those would be old-time, full-time workers. Instead of the newer workers coming in. So it all becomes a vicious circle. And the city says it's concerned about youth unemployment. It's concerned about raising the profile of equity in the city. The answer lies in one place. Certainly, again, in the library. If you really made some decent full-time jobs that the people from our communities who usually enter the library system working as pages under 10 hours a week can aspire to get a job in less than a decade, we would really be doing something for the city of Toronto and its economy.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Maureen.
Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. I guess I wasn't paying enough attention to the library board. I don't sit on it. So what happened to the equity lens? We had determined that that was going to be the first, I think, city division that would go through this kind of examination of their budgets based on, with this equity lens. What happened to it?
For the first time ever that I can remember in 30 years, the library board took a motion from the city council and said they weren't going to implement it. And I had actually followed up with the city clerk's office and at the time the city manager's office to see how a motion from city council could not be implemented by an agency board and commission. And apparently they said that could happen. So it was passed at city council and it was defeated at the library board, not unanimously, obviously, but it was defeated. So that never, ever happened.
What was the argument against it?
There was no argument. It was dead silence. It was just defeated without any discussion. I don't even think most of the people understood what the motion was. And even if they did understand it, it was defeated with intent.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah,
thank
wow.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.
Next is, we have about 15 minutes left, so we should be able to get through 2 or 3 more deputants.
I'm going to ask Councillor Crawford. I'm next, and my son is right
Sarah?
after me. We were going to present together. He's in high school. He was coming here on his lunch break, and he's really keen to participate. Is there any way you could bump me till right after lunch and let somebody else go and they could leave?
Yeah, no, that's fine if you
Thank you.
want to do so. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Was it you and Jacob?
That's right.
Okay, so we'll do that after lunch. Next is Maggie Helwig. Welcome, Maggie.
Thank you. I'd also like to speak with Eileen Goulden, who is 45 on the list. We'll talk together.
Okay.
I am, as I think many of you know, the priest at the Church of St. Stephen in the Fields in Kensington Market and the chair of the Social Justice and Advocacy Committee of the Anglican Diocese. And Eileen is the Social Justice and Advocacy Consultant for the Anglican Diocese of Toronto. Eileen will start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. A little over 2 years ago, I sat in the council chambers and I was very inspired when every single councillor voted unanimously for the approval of the TO Prosperity Toronto Poverty Reduction Strategy. 2 and a bit years on, and I'm feeling a little disappointed. The Poverty Reduction Strategy is one of a number of strategies that this council has passed, which, if implemented, would make Toronto a much fairer, greener, healthier, and more resilient city with equity for its most disadvantaged people. Unfortunately, we are great on paper, but we are not great in practice. What we end up seeing is that every year the budget comes around and we're told there's no money. There's no money in the kitty to do the things that you, councillors, have already promised to do. Or there is a tiny bit of money which cannot possibly implement all the things. And so we're put in this position of all the people who have an issue that they're concerned about, they're passionate about, libraries, climate, fair transit, poverty, homelessness, have to come here every year and beg to get a little bit. And it's unconscionable. And we don't like having to do that, and we don't see, I don't see, and my colleague here does not see, that it's a good idea to pit these people against each other, because we're not going to make a judgment about a person living in housing that needs upgrading in Toronto community housing is more deserving than somebody who's already on the street, who's in a further dire strait. And we're not going to say that a child that's in need of of student nutrition is more deserving than somebody who can't get to work because of the cost of transit. We think that these are all very important, and we would like to see a vision for this city that takes that seriously and considers how they're going to fund it. And I know you are required to present a balanced budget, but the mantra has been the mantra for keeping property taxes under the rate of inflation has so far trumped, and I use that word advisedly, trumped every other impulse to do the right thing.
Yeah, there's been a great deal of attention, obviously, lately to the crisis of homelessness, particularly in the extreme cold. I will say this is the lived reality every day in my parish, of extreme poverty, of desperation, of death. There is word on the street this morning that another man has died in a city shelter. We don't know the details. We haven't confirmed this, but it's going around the street. And given the statistics on homeless deaths, it seems very probable. I am tired of watching people die, and I am tired of coming here 2 or 3 times every year for the last I don't know how many years to say that I'm tired of watching people die. How many times do I have to say it? This is the lived reality of my parish. I know that there are many other Anglican parishes throughout this city where climate change is a high priority, where they want to see something put into the climate strategy. There are transit. There are so many things the city could and should be doing, so many ways that the extreme cold crisis, the homelessness crisis, the people dying on our sidewalks is emblematic of the abandonment of the most vulnerable people in our society. In favor of a technically balanced budget, a budget that looks adequate on paper and is not adequate in the lived reality of people in this city. I'm coming here again, and I've said this before too, I am coming here to plead for vision, to plead for civic leadership, not for just a mathematical exercise in coming up with a budget that looks good and a property tax rate that meets a certain mathematical formula. I want civic leadership that has a vision for a city in which everyone is included and everyone is safe and everyone has dignity and everyone is a community. I believe that leadership is possible. That vision is possible. This city could be a good city for everyone. But we need a level of leadership which we have not seen up to this point under this mayor or under the previous mayor. And it's not enough to say, well, you know, we're doing okay and you should vote for us because if you don't, it will get worse. We need someone who will say, and John Tory could be the person who will say, we are going to build a city in which everyone matters. We need someone to say that. We need someone to take the risks of saying that. We need someone to have the vision, to have the inspiration, to have the leadership to say that. This is what I am asking you for.
We have in our faith tradition a verse of scripture that says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And every Tuesday in front of the Church of the Holy Trinity, people gather to combine the names of the people who have perished on the streets or in shelters, homeless people in this city. And it's not just them, it's children whose parents cannot afford or cannot get them into licensed daycare who then are put in unlicensed daycare. And we had that situation a year or two ago. That little girl died in an unlicensed daycare. There are, people do suffer and people do in fact die where there is no vision. And we are calling on council and on this committee, but on the wider council to have that vision.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much for coming once again and for the work that you do every day. I struggle all the time with this process as well, and I'm sure every councillor around this table does, and I know even our finance staff do. And I guess I'm looking for any ideas about how we fix this process. We get locked in the spring by approving often an envelope we're operating within, and then work backwards and say, okay, what can fit in that envelope? And at the same time, over here at our standing committees, we approve all these plans. But the financial constraints are over here.
Yep.
And then we try and wedge them together.
Yeah.
So I'd like to hear your ideas about how we change the process, if you have any.
Yeah, I think it is exactly as you said, that initial financial constraint is set before there's public consultation, before there's an opportunity to look at what we want and what we need as a city. It's set separate from an analysis of the real city needs. And I think you're absolutely right. From that point on, the process is a trapped and constrained process. And I think that is precisely the problem. It needs to be more open and transparent at an earlier stage, and the financial constraints shouldn't be set before there is an analysis of actual need. Yeah.
There was a document that came out in May of this year that was cost implications of 12 city strategies.
Yes.
And yet there was never any discussion of, well, how were we going to meet that, or that, certainly not that citizens were invited to participate in, how are we going to meet that? Yes. This year, this budget. It was like, well, that's going to cost us so and so many $1 million. Oh, well. And even in the preliminary budget, there were a number of, in the appendix, there were a number of actions, many of which were implementing various programs from those strategies, and said, well, these would be nice to do. They all have a positive equity impact, and we look at things, as you know, Councillor Layton was saying, we're looking at things now through an equity lens. Oh, it'll cost $41 million or so. Oh, but we only have 9. Oh, well. You know, and then what are we supposed to do? Why isn't there a vision for saying, okay, this is what it's going to cost? How would we reasonably adjust to meet that need? Are there some things that can be put off? But like, let's see what's possible first, instead of, well, that's not possible.
And part of the issue of leadership is, you know, you hear, well, we can't raise property taxes because people just won't put up with that. That is an issue of political leadership. That is an issue of civic vision. That is an issue of explaining to people that, yes, some people who own property may pay a bit more in property taxes. In return for this, there are going to be all kinds of things in this city that you want and that you need.
So the leaders of the faith community have come here and spoken out many times with a very clear voice. Are there, and on the issue of raising revenue, are there ways that you can spread that message within your own congregations and reflect it back to the elected officials? Because I struggle with this as well. Just this morning, people were telling me, as I was trying to dig out of snow this morning, we need to raise taxes. I'm prepared to raise taxes. You go tell them. I said, you come down and tell us. I tell them what you tell me, and they don't believe me. So, I mean, are there ways that you could? I know it's not within your religious mandate necessarily.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We need other ways that our congregations can have input into the process.
Yes.
I mean, people from my congregation can't come here and speak today because they're at work.
Right.
I know that several people went to the Etobicoke consultations and called for a raise in the property tax rate from our congregations.
Maybe our faith communities or our churches can do some surveys and bring it back to us. I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. I think we could definitely follow up on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Carroll had questions. That'll be the last questions before.
Oh, okay, certainly. Thank you. Maggie, you raised exactly the thing that was raised a little over a week ago, I guess. Former City Manager Joe Penichetti and I spoke at a presentation at U of T, and we were joined by a member of the Youth Cabinet. And what we got back from the crowd, and what the Youth Cabinet member, who was a member of our panel but was slapping us both on the wrist, said was that if the only way we're going to get out of this, election promise of exact numbers that then, as you say, trumped every other consideration, was to go back to the system where probably at the beginning of every term of office, there needs to be that massive community priority setting and also a council priority setting. We have not, since 2005, locked all the councillors in a room to find out what they have in common and what they all believe at the beginning of a term so that that could gear financial priorities. And we have not done a, let us get on the road and listen to the whole city before we craft the budget since early 2007. So you're asking us to, well, this is a valuable thing we're doing today, that we ought to be doing it before we launch a budget that is
absolutely
all but set in stone by the number.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, all that's possible is tweaking. We need to have an opportunity for the city to speak while substantive decisions can still be made.
So participants there from the Monk School, Rotman School, and several other academics at U of T agree with you wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Karen. Thank you for your deputations. We're going to recess till 1:30. Okay. Oh.